Gratitude is the lighthouse. Everything is dark except for what you hold true in your heart. You can say goodbye and thank you. I miss you and I'm grateful. You can watch a flower die, yet still see the garden through dry eyes. Hi, I'm your host, Natasha T Miller, and this is The Science of Grief. Today we're talking about dementia. Later on, I'll talk with Bonnie Wheeler about the effects dementia can have on families and how family members can support their loved ones who suffer from the disease. But first, our producer, Kaylin Higgins, talks with Savanah Rayyan, who shares the story of losing her grandmother who suffered from dementia.
So I am the youngest granddaughter out of the 40 grandkids. And so usually, traditionally, in my culture, boys are favored. But my grandma and I had a special relationship regardless. Like, I have two older brothers. But my grandma and I were very close. I didn't meet my grandpa. He died before I was born, a couple months before I was born. And she had lost her son when I was 5 years old. My father had a twin brother, and he passed away when they were 3. So my grandma went through a lot of hardships in her life, and obviously losing a kid is never easy. I can't even imagine it. So, I don't remember my grandma before because I was 5 years old, so I don't remember her before my uncle passed away. But after, I know it's tradition in my culture for like women to wear black, and you're not necessarily supposed to like wear makeup or dye your hair when someone like that passes away. Like your son, and when you're much older, because my grandma was about 80. So my childhood, it was filled with her still grieving, and kind of, she was just living to kind of live. There was no real purpose for her in her own, because she had lost her son. But and so she had a couple of diseases. She had diabetes, and she had some heart issues, so she wasn't able to fully take care of herself when I was a child. So we always took care of her, watched her diabetes, and that's kind of how we became close. My dad, I would go to her house twice a day, especially in the summer. I would go 3 times a day sometimes, or her apartment. And it genuinely is just like spending time together. And our relationship grew, and I always loved braiding, and she had the most beautiful hair. So I would always braid her hair, and I would sit right behind her, and I would do her hair. And, she kind of like known me as the person doing her hair. And that was when I was younger, before I could like actually help, before I could actually do like things for her. Because when I was still like a preteen, if I was to go to her house and it was just me and her, she didn't like it for me to cut apples or anything, because she thought like I was going to hurt myself. But I was like 12, so I could do it. But she just, she was worried about me. And she was like 80, so I was worried about her doing it. And so it was like, but obviously she won because she's my grandma. And she wouldn't even let me plug things in to the outlets because, because she was born in Jordan. So a lot of those things aren't, really reliable. So she was just always worried. And just, so a lot of my childhood, she was sick, and she was getting sicker, and she was diagnosed with dementia, I would say, in about like 2010. And so when that kind of happened, it happened really slowly. And then some points would happen quickly. And it was just really weird because you look at her day by day and it's like, okay, nothing has changed. But then you see her like compared like two years apart, and she's completely different. So a lot of my life was spent kind of, not a normal granddaughter and grandma relationship, which I don't regret at all. Like I'm so thankful for my relationship that I had with her, even if it didn't look like how like a lot of people have their relationships with their grandma. And, we, from spending time with her, and she took care of me, I took care of her, and we did that in different ways for each other. I was her person, and she was my person.
So when did you come to realize that it was something that wasn't normal? Since you said, you kind of grew up with it, you thought it was normal.
Oh, honestly, up until like sometime in high school, when I started seeing other grandparents interact with their, like, my friends' grandparents with them, and just seeing that, oh, like, my grandma's taking me out this Saturday, or my grandma bought me this, or whatever it is, and I'm like, wait, your grandma can do that? Like, what are you saying? I was always just like, my grandma makes me laugh, my grandma gives me candy, I do my grandma's hair, like, that those are my stories about my grandma and I. So, but it was never like something I was always focused on. And then I realized, I was like, wait, this is not how it's supposed to be. This disease is taking over.
Did it come to a point where someone told you that your grandmother had dementia, or was it like kind of putting pieces together, or was it a little bit of both?
Yeah, it was putting pieces together for sure. Because, yeah, I can't remember a clear, defined moment when my family and I reacted to the news of her dementia or anything, but it was little by little, and her being less physically able. She was also overweight, so it was hard for her to get around, but then with the dementia, it was even more difficult. So it was little by little her losing abilities and her losing herself sometimes, because she just wasn't herself at times because of the dementia. So I think it was kind of like piece by piece. And I know, like, she would always wear black to honor my uncle. And then when she stopped wearing black, because we just stopped putting her in black, which would only happen if she forgot. She would never have let that happen otherwise, because she was still grieving. But then I remember that day was like a really big step, because that had meant she was slowly forgetting.
Like when she didn't know who I was and when she couldn't even say my name, it was really hard to see her like that, because she was the person that I would come to, even though she only spoke Arabic and she know like 3 words in English, and I barely know Arabic. We still somehow had like this strong relationship that it's so weird to even explain, because people are like, how, like, that doesn't make any sense. But she was just my person. Like, I would just sit with her. I would literally just sit with her and watch her eat sometimes. It was like the most simple relationship, but so much to it as well.
I'm glad you had that relationship with your grandmother, especially your family is pretty huge. You said she has 40 grandkids and around 20 great-grandkids. So can you tell me a little bit more of how your grandmother passed?
Yeah, so like I said, she was diagnosed with dementia in like about 2010, I would say. That's when like she started hallucinating, and it was the first signs of dementia happening. And things were okay for, like, in terms of like her being physically able and her knowing who I was. I would have to like remind her sometimes, but for the most part, she was okay. And but some sentences didn't make sense, or she was getting confused. So in 2014, she moved in with my family, and then in 2017, she moved in with my aunt's family. And in 2017, she had like a very minor heart attack. And at that point, they thought she was going to pass. Like, everyone, we were planning on putting her in hospice. Like, we thought she was going to pass. Then she after that, she changed a lot compared to how she was even 2 months prior. She was eating less. She was less physically able. She had lost a lot of weight at that point, and the heart attack really changed her and made her go for the worse. But after that minor heart attack, so that was February 2017, and she lived all the way till October 2020. And she would have her days, but I would visit her once a week at my aunt's, and it was a blessing for her to even say my name. And my grandma would say my name, because there's no V in the Arabic language. So she would say my name like Savanah. And yeah, so I would try so hard to get her to say my name like that because I loved hearing her say it. And she never really knew who I was. Although this one time she was carrying a baby, like a fake baby, a baby doll, and she called the baby me when I wasn't even there. So that made me really excited because like that means like I was, I was like on her mind or something. It made me really excited. But yeah, and so she just kind of continued to get worse, continued to eating less, but also just like very low energy. Half the time she was sleeping, couldn't have conversations. My grandma taught me a lot of Arabic songs, so she wasn't able to do that. And my grandma was feisty, so she stopped being feisty, kind of just completely low energy, not physically able. Everything changed with my grandma in February 2017, but, she was still alive, still going strong. And, my aunt took really good care of her. So, because my aunt's a nurse and her daughter's a nurse practitioner. So they took obviously amazing care of my grandma. And I really don't think my grandma would have survived like as long as she did without them taking great care of her because they knew what to do and they, they're nurses, so they know. And then I would say the end of September of 2020, it was just her time. She stopped eating, not even like the soft things she was eating. She wasn't even drinking. We'd have to like put like a cotton filled with water and just squeeze water in her mouth because she wasn't consuming anything. And even if she was eating, she wasn't getting nutrients from what she was eating. So yeah, so it was really hard to see her like that. And then 3 weeks later, and the doctors knew it, that she was going to pass away. And 3 weeks later, she passed away. And it was really hard seeing her like that. So I knew that I was going to be relieved because I knew she was just like hanging on for us. And it was so weird to even think of my grandma as like not being here because she was like a constant in my entire life. So it was really weird because I was in shock for some reason, just because it wasn't, even though like I had time to process, I was still like, because my grandma was so like feisty and strong. Like she had like so many near-death experiences that like I just always thought like somehow she was going to be okay, Like I don't know why. I always thought somehow she was going to be okay. Even though my grandma was like 95, she literally wasn't eating like, it was like she was going to pass away. Like we knew it. I don't know why I was still in shock. I think, it was just kind of denial. But yeah, and I just I cried to my dad and we talked to my uncle. And, my dad and his brothers are so used to this. So it's not, like my grandma's death wasn't like, they had their brother pass away that was, like far more tragic because he was so young. But my grandma, everyone had processed it because my grandma hasn't been herself for so long. So, but for me, it was just weird because, like I said, like I haven't had anyone pass away before that was close to me. So, like really, really close to me. But my grandma was really my everything.
So after your grandmother passed, as far as grief-wise, did it hit you right after or did it, like take time?
It was really weird because when people tell you that like grieving is the strangest and it comes in the biggest waves, it's the weirdest feeling. And it's so true because when my grandma passed, it was just super random times where I'm like just bawling my eyes out. And like kind of every night for that month, it was really hard to even sleep. I would think about her a lot at night when I was going to bed. And I would watch videos and kind of basically cry myself to sleep just because it was really weird to just like keep thinking about how she's literally not here anymore. And like even today, I literally dinner an hour ago with my parents, we were talking about something else. And then I thought about how my grandma says Savanah, not Savannah, or not, my family says Savanah. But my grandma would say Savanah or Savanah. And I was thinking about that and I just started crying just now, like an hour ago. I was eating my salad and I just started crying. And my mom started crying just because she knows I was really close with her. Things have definitely gotten better, I don't cry myself to sleep every night, but it was hard. And actually another elderly lady, my former neighbor who was elderly, she passed away in January, and she was like my third grandma to me. So it was hard. And also my other grandma has dementia. So just thinking about how like I don't want to go through what I went through with this grandma. And I know that's just going to be terrible for me if I have to see her like that. And I'm expecting that. So that's just another thing, I think about. And I think about my grandma, and it makes it harder too.
Do you feel yourself, when you have these thoughts, do you feel yourself getting anxious?
Oh, yeah. Especially, it's with my one grandma who passed away, it's like things have gotten a lot better where I'm like, okay, it's okay. Like, I do miss her, but I know it's natural. I know it's a part of life. I know she lived a good life. And I know, she left me so much, in terms of just like love and kindness and teachings. But when I think of my other grandma and how I'm going to go through it with her and how it's going to be really hard to see her get worse and worse, because I know that's what's going to happen. That's the disease. It's not like it's, and I try to have faith, but I've been through it before. So that makes me really anxious. And thinking about my other grandma is really hard, especially because I wasn't as close with her as I was with my grandma who passed away. And it's hard because, my grandma, this grandma that's alive, she got dementia so young. Like my grandma got dementia. My grandma that passed away got dementia when she was older, so it was like more okay. But my other grandma's like 73, and she was diagnosed like a couple of years ago, so she was even in her late 60s. And then I started getting anxious because I think about my parents and how it runs in the family, and I'm like, I don't want to see my parents like that. I don't want to see, and I have so many aunts and uncles who are so old, and I'm like, I don't want to see them like that. It's like such a terrible disease because it's not like it's not like it's only physically hurting you, it's mentally hurting you. But it's not even like, it's not just my grandma not knowing my name. It's like, it ruined her body, it ruined her mind, and it ruined her interactions and her emotions because we don't know what she's thinking. We don't know how so yeah, anxious on all levels, especially for the future, because I know what's coming, and I'm fearful of what might come from this disease.
When your grandmother passed away from dementia, how did you cope? What are some things, or what are some thought processes you went through to get yourself out the bed every morning?
My grandma lived her life in Jordan. And she came here when she was an adult. My dad came here at 20, and she was in her probably like mid 60s. And I knew that, the life my grandma lived was, she was a mother of 11 kids. She woke up at 5 a.m. trying to do the best for her family. She had to take care of all those kids and take care of her house. She did everything for everyone. And then when she got older, her husband passed, her son passed, and her life wasn't the easiest. And I think, she got married at 13. She didn't have all of these opportunities that I have not only been given because of actual like laws that are enforced in America that aren't in Jordan. Not only that I've been given these opportunities, but I've also, worked hard because I was allowed to have even the ability to work hard at opportunities. Just me talking to you is something my grandma, would never have had the opportunity. Me talking on this, on my laptop in my room, my grandma did not have the opportunities that I am so fortunate and blessed to have. So something that gets me out of bed is just working for what she didn't have and using the blessings that I have that she wasn't able to have. And me even having choices. It's like my grandma had to get up at 5 a.m. and not do anything for herself. It's like I can just put the money in my account and use it for whatever I want. My grandma did nothing for herself. She probably ate. She was the last one to eat, And I couldn't imagine that. So I think about those, and I think about like the life I want for my kids and the life I want to teach my kids that my grandma lived, I think about all those things and how like what I'm doing now is going to affect my future and the future of, my grandma's great grandkids, and I get excited too. And I always say like, yeah, it was hard and it was like really sucky, but like I would not change it for the world. Like I would not change the entire process of my grandma because it taught me so much. And so recognizing that also helped me just like understanding that like this, and I really believe everything happens for a reason. So like just understanding that happened for a reason at that specific time in that way, for that period of time for a reason, and like knowing that I have a purpose and that had a purpose in my life, like makes me accepting it, because it's like, you know, like like this is really silly, but like when I get a paper cut, I get so mad because I'm like, what was the point of this? Like, it taught me nothing. You know what I mean? Like I'm like it just hurts for no reason. It's not teaching me anything. But with my grandma, it hurt, but it taught me something. So it's like, although it hurt, obviously 10 times worse than a paper cut, but it's somewhat I can be thankful for it because it's like I know I got so much from it. So that's genuine, though. I actually get really mad when I get paper cuts. But, you know, I think about what happened. I think about the past, and I think about like what I'm doing in this specific moment. And I think about how can I use whatever I learned or whatever I'm doing now to help me in the future, and try to balance it that way too.
That is awesome. I'm so happy that you said that is, you know, a great way for you to cope. I have two more questions before we wrap it up. One of my questions are, when you do, so to say, like live in the future and plan and, you know, learn lessons, and, you know, how you were saying that you get angry from a paper cut because, you know, it teaches you nothing. It just hurts for no reason.
Yeah.
So when you have negative thoughts and have the anxiety feeling for your grandmother that is, you know, living now, do you also apply that same strategy to your anxiety?
Yeah, because with my grandma who is living now, there's just so much I can do. Well, there's only so much I can do, but there is a lot that I can do as well. Like something I want to be working on soon is like this poster for my grandma with a bunch of pictures of like her family and everything. Because I was gonna do a photo album, but I figured it'd be harder for like her nurse aide to help her go through it or anything, because, you know, she would have to like point at it and stuff and like explain who the people are when, you know, the nurse aide doesn't know who everyone is. So I'm going to make like a big poster for her, so, you know, I can like write down who these people are, and so that the nurse aide might be able to help her, since we can only visit her so much with COVID. It's like finding those new ways to communicate with her, just whatever way it is, because you know, going to see her at the nursing home, like I can only see her for like an hour, because they have strict rules with COVID. So it's future driven in the fact that like I think about like long term what it's going to be, and that also creates anxiety for me. But I also think about the time I have now and like the relationships I have now, and like that I'm pretty close with my uncles from my mom's side, who the grandma's still alive. That's my mom's mom. So, and I, you know, I like when they tell me stories. I like it when, you know, they explain to me how, like, my grandma felt about me and everything. So those are kind of those things that I like to do. And I like to maintain those relationships with my uncles. I call them chalos. So I keep wanting to say that. So in case I do say it, that's for reference. So yeah, so I like having those relationships with them because it, you know, I see my grandma in them. Like my mom looks so much like my grandma, and people tell me I look, yeah. So it's like, I just see my grandma in them, and I know my grandma's in them, and I know she's in me. So even if she, you know, she's here physically, and although she's not here, you know, as much mentally, we can still make the most of it, I think, because there's no point. And like something, because, you know, I'm in therapy, so something that I've just been learning is like, and I knew this before, but, you know, it's a constant reminder, and you have to always work on like these mindsets that you try to maintain, because it's not just something that you can think about once and then go ahead and move on with the rest of your life. So something I try to maintain is like to do what's in my control, and to like, you know, whatever's making me anxious, like start little and do what's in your control. And something that's in my control is taking those initiatives with my grandma and maintaining those relationships.
I've learned a lot about myself, and I think a big coping strategy that I've learned is to kind of restructure your thinking and your self-talk. So those are really big things, because I know, like, one day I woke up and I just was just super down about myself in every regard. And I just started texting myself these things. I think I said something like, oh, you're not special. You'll never be special. I don't know who you think you are, thinking that you are. And I told my therapist that, and she was just, why do you think that you told yourself that? Questioning my moves and why or why not I do or don't do something. And having that therapy and having someone kind of question it with me, that's really helpful because it doesn't make things seem mindless and one-sided. When you do something and you have someone question it or you question it on a very small scale with a very simple question, you get down to the root of it. So I think that's what's been helping me is just discovering myself better, and understanding why I do things, why I don't do things, and breaking down my self-talk and making sure that I'm aware of the things that I'm telling myself.
For those who maybe experience something similar to you, like maybe those who lost their grandmother, lost their grandfather, or just anybody that lost anybody, period, what would be something you would say to them? What message would you say to them?
It's to not be afraid to feel your feelings. Like I cried a bunch during my grandma. I wrote my grandma's speech, and like I was excited for it because I was able to express my relationship with my grandma with other people, and I was able to express how I was feeling about it. So don't be afraid to feel it, and don't be afraid to kind of understand what you're feeling, so you can look back at it and be like, okay, so this is how much I've grown. This is what I've learned from this moment, and this is what it taught me. And although this was really hard, I got so much from it, like on a personal level and like in terms of like character and growth and everything. So yeah, I would say just understand how you're feeling and take that time and talk about them and tell stories. And, talking about it with people and expressing yourself is going to really help because you're processing it more rather than kind of just ignoring it and just, trying to move on because it's going to come back eventually.
And honestly, to quote Hannah Montana, life is what you make it to some extent. I do think things happen and it's not all in your control, but you can change your own outlook and viewpoint on things. Whatever the situation is, whatever cards that you're dealt. And I think you can make your own light out of lots of different experiences and interactions, and it can be beautiful. So feel your feelings and also experience what you're experiencing in the moment. And I think light will come from that as well.
That was our producer, Kaylin Higgins, talking with Savanah Rayyan. Now, I want to welcome one of our go-to mental health practitioners, Bonnie Wheeler.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Again, I'm Bonnie Wheeler. I'm a licensed professional counselor and licensed master social worker, and I have worked in grief and loss most recently with Michigan State University's Counseling and Psychiatric Services. I've run grief groups for many, many years,
Thank you,
and I'm
Bonnie.
glad to be here.
And we're happy to have you. So let's, I'll jump right into it and just get some of your initial thoughts on the story that you just heard from Savanah about her grandmother.
Well, Savanah did such a great job of describing her experience, and I was struck initially by what a lovely relationship she and her grandmother had, and that she gave such good examples of how it is early on in a loss with someone you're really attached to, and then how the further out it goes, the more you feel the healing. And she was wonderfully articulate about that and about how there are those moments that, you just get surprised by a moment where something will make you cry. And it might be just, as in her case, the way her grandmother pronounced her name. She was thinking about it and wasn't crying herself to sleep every night, but there were still those moments where she got hit by that wave of grief. And thankful with Savanah, she was thankful for the relationship, even though her grandmother is gone. She's still learning from it. And that's such a healthy way to approach it.
Yeah. So you talked about the stages, and I want to go to the first stage because we're talking about Savanah's grandmother, suffering from dementia, which causes some sort of anticipatory grief. So my question to you would be, for those people out there, those young adults who are just now again starting to deal with grief in these different sort of ways, how do you approach anticipatory grief? What do I do if I'm experiencing that right now and I'm looking at somebody I love pass away?
I think it's more acknowledging that you're grieving the things that the loved one is losing as they're losing them. I think we don't realize often when we have a loved one who has a debilitating disease of some kind or just is aging out of their body, we don't realize that we're grieving all the little losses that they used to be able to do that they can't do now. An example of that would be one of the reasons I had to delay the call a little bit was I have a 96-year-old relative who's in assisted living, and she called me kind of panicked because she couldn't remember when they were coming to wash her hair. And maybe a month ago, she wouldn't have had that trouble. And she wouldn't have called me panicked. And so there's that almost continual reminder that they're losing little bits of themselves, especially with dementia, which fortunately my mother-in-law doesn't have. But as she's aging, she's losing little bits of herself. And as you're anticipating the actual death of someone, you're also grieving those little losses every time you see them.
How do you make the most out of time with people who are slipping away, who may have dementia, when it hurts you?
Well, I think you look for those little things that make you laugh, perhaps make them laugh, the little things that you can still connect on. Music, for instance, might be one that you can still connect. I mean, sing one of the old songs that they knew. And often that old memory will come back. Sharing a cookie and just enjoying that with them. Just the little things. And even telling them stories, even if they're not really responding, but telling them stories that about yourself or about what you know about them. Because then, well, first off, with dementia, we don't really know exactly what they still can hold on to. So you're contributing and helping them perhaps feel a little more involved and like you remember that they are there.
Yeah, I love it. Again, this episode is very, very close to me because my grandmother suffered from dementia before she passed away. And one thing that I would try to do is I would try to never get frustrated with her. She could tell me the same story 100 times, and I would act like it was the first time that I heard the story. And I wanted to know, like, how can we, and it's not stay out of judgment, but stay out of frustration. How can we recognize that something is happening to this person and not try to correct them when they tell a story, 100 times, when they call you the wrong name? Do we accept and play along, or do we correct the person? What's the healthiest way for them or for us?
I think it's a little of calming, keeping ourselves calm. So, breathing and just appreciating the moment. And a gentle reminder of, no, my name's Bonnie and not Dorothy. Dorothy was my mother.
Yeah.
But it has to be gentle because they're not doing any of that on purpose. And I think each of us has to judge in the moment whether it's important to correct something. I had one of my good friends, actually, her mother thought she was back in college when she was in the assisted living, the memory care place. And they just went with that. They were like, well, we're going to move you to another room. We found a single for you. Because she was perfectly happy being in her head back in college. And they'd still come in and talk to her and explain who people were and show her pictures. Savannah was planning for her living grandmother to make almost like a storyboard of the family, like a poster.
Yeah, that was so powerful.
Those kinds of things, and talking through memories, because the old memories are often they're way longer than new ones.
Yeah, that was really powerful. She said she's going to create that storyboard and then have the nurses, give them the names and have them tell her the names. And that's such it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and it shows how much Savanah actually cares about her grandmother.
Absolutely.
Savanah started by, and this language is familiar to a lot of us, she started by saying, like, her grandma was her person. And she kept repeating that, like, that was my person. This is somebody I've known my whole entire life. She told all of these beautiful stories about these wonderful memories that she was having. How can these young adults navigate losing their person? You have so many people in your life, but you feel like the one you lost was the one. What are tips on how to get through that?
Well, I'm going to reference Savanah again. Most of the time she was talking, I was going, oh, man, that's just right. She did this wonderful thing where she started also seeing her person in the remaining people, like her uncles, her aunts, her mom. And you begin to realize that the person who's passed is still there in the form of their own children and their grandchildren and the people who were around them, telling stories among the family or people who were close to this person. I think telling stories keeps them alive, but also reminds you that, oh, yeah, this was my person, and they left me with stories.
Yeah. And something else that Savanah's grandmother left her with that seemed to be, unexpected, and I'm sure her grandma didn't, she wasn't meaning to leave her with it, but it was gratitude. That was a large, you heard that part was a large part of her story. And I love that. It was, when Kaylin asked her about her thought process, and she's just saying to herself, I just think about if all the things basically my grandmother went through, all the things she wouldn't be able to afford to do, or a life she was never afforded that I have that comes so easily right now. So I like going back to just Savanah's mindset and the way she just adopted a completely new and strong mindset. And I won't even say new, just a strong mindset. How do we develop that? How do we change our minds? How do we say, instead of focusing about this or thinking about this, I'm going to train myself to think about all of these good and positive things around me?
I think the first step in that is catching ourselves when we're not thinking, that when we're doing the negative self-talk. And the first step to change that is catching yourself and say, wait a minute, I would never talk to my friends this way. Why am I beating myself up? So using some of the things that we've talked about before in this, being grateful every day, that does help change your attitude and change the self-talk.
Yeah, and I mean, the reoccurring theme is just gratitude, being grateful. Somebody is there for me. Something else that Savanah talked about was the traditions in her culture. And she said that, and this is something that I've always been really connected to, was first holidays without a person. after you've lost a person. And she said, they couldn't do it in the way they would do it, pre-COVID. But the first holiday after you lose somebody in the Arabic culture, you don't really celebrate the holiday. What's the importance of taking those breaks, of honoring those traditions, or taking breaks to honor the people who you've lost?
Well, it's certainly really important to both honor the people and the culture, or whatever the culture is. If the culture is we all get together to have a feast in this person's honor in a year, then you do it the best you can, whether that's a Zoom. This last spring I went to a Zoom memorial that was just fabulous. There were like 150 people on the call. And the stories that people told were amazing. That was done because of the culture. They're a Jewish family. They couldn't do the tradition where the neighbors came by because there was a pandemic. So I think figuring a creative way to do that's real important. It honors the deceased, and it also honors the family culture and reinforces that.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking to, taking a break, how, and I like to ask this all the time. So these young adults, who are, again, just now experiencing this, understand that it's okay to not be okay and to say, I need to withdraw from any and everything to deal with my own mental health.
Oh, yeah, especially early on. I mean, if you think about Savanah, she was crying herself to sleep every night. One of the things that happens typically with all of us when we have any loss, but a sudden loss of someone who is our person, and in some ways any loss, even with dementia, it feels sudden. You anticipate it, but it also, that final piece is rather sudden. It's hard to think about day-to-day life when your whole mind is going, ouch, this hurts. And you're waking up in the morning having maybe dreamed about your loved one, and you have to come to the reality again that was just a dream and they're not here. So that first, it can be 2-3 months. It's very hard to focus on other things. So taking a break, being really gentle with yourself about that is extremely important. You may, if you're studying, some people, the studying relieves the grief in that they can really focus on it. Other people can't focus at all, and they need to, go and take a bereavement leave from school because they can't think straight. I think you have to pay attention to what your needs are, but if you're not being able to think of anything or focus on anything, be gentle with yourself about that and take a break. And some of the break could be doing the family traditions to really honor that person. Some of the break could be just being with family.
Yeah, but take the break that you need. Well,
pardon?
I was saying take the break that you need if you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I think that you've given us, everything in this interview, and I think between you and between Savanah, everybody will walk away with some really amazing and great coping skills. As always, before we get out of here, I always like to ask, is there anything else you like to add?
Well, I do think, Savanah, this was a great interview with Savanah, and she mentioned a couple things. One was the reality of what is in each of our control. And I think that mindset of gratefulness, but also giving up those things that aren't within our control. And what's It's not in our control how other people grieve. It's not in our control as to whether life ends. And accepting, what's in control is how I cope with this and how I move forward and how I learn from this and how I carry the spirit and the love of my person forward in my life with me.
This episode was produced by me, Natasha T Miller, Shameen Sultana, Kaylin Higgins, our executive producer, David Lyons, and our editor, David Weinberg. Theme music by Jordan Davis, with sound design and additional music by Sam Bobian, with additional production support from Patrick Bond, Aaron Appleby, Maida Stange, Antoine Scott, and Holly Ann Stewart, who creates our artwork for each episode. If you haven't, check it out at WDET.org. The Science of Grief podcast is a collaboration between Science Gallery Detroit and WDET, Detroit's NPR station, and is supported by the Children's Foundation of Michigan, MSU, FCU, and Science Sandbox.